The neighborhood of Sunnyvale Estates gleamed like a postcard from a 1950s dream. White picket fences, perfectly trimmed hedges, and lawns so uniform they looked photoshopped. But beneath the surface, it was a carefully constructed cage ruled by the Sunnyvale Homeowners Association, or as we all called it in whispers, Karen's Kingdom. My name is Emily Voss. I'm 29, and my world is a meticulously maintained suburb where one woman's ego dictates the height of your grass and the color of your mailbox. I moved here when I was 15, right after my mom married into what she called stability. Karen Whitmore had already been HOA president for a decade, a smiling, pearl-wearing tyrant who greeted every new resident with a welcome basket and a 30-page covenant packet. She treated the whole neighborhood like her personal kingdom, and because my mom was terrified of rocking the boat, Karen became the de facto stepmother from hell, polite in public, poison in private. By day I was the HOA treasurer, a volunteer role Karen had gifted me to keep me under her thumb. I processed dues, mediated petty disputes about mailbox flags, and onboard new homeowners with the same reassuring smile I'd perfected over 14 years. By night, I lived in the house my late mother left me. The one Karen liked to remind me was only allowed to exist because she hadn't found a violation big enough to lean it yet. The dissonance hummed constantly. Sunnyvale Estates prided itself on family values and harmony, a motto etched into the stone entrance sign right next to the security camera that Karen personally reviewed every morning. What used to be relaxed backyard barbecues became nightly audits disguised as neighborly check-ins. Karen would stroll up in her pastel cardigan, clipboard in hand, and turn every conversation into a compliance meeting. She'd measure my grass with a laser tool, critique my holiday lights, question my choice of bird feeder color, beige only, of course. She never raised her voice. She didn't need to. Her power lived in the stillness, the way she could make you feel scrutinized and found wanting with one arched eyebrow over her reading glasses. She was pruning lives, trimming away any blade of independence she couldn't control. My mother saw it, of course. She saw the light dim in my eyes, the way I began speaking in clipped, careful sentences, offering only the information required. But Mom was trapped in her own gilded cage of HOA-approved security and the fear of being the problem neighbor. Whenever I dared whisper a complaint, her face would tighten. "She's just detail-oriented. Emily," she'd murmur, hands fluttering to straighten an already perfect tablecloth. "She wants the best for the community. She has a disciplined way of showing it." Disciplined. That was Karen's favorite word. For her ruthless special assessments. For her rigid control over every mailbox flag. For the way she broke spirits one condescending suggestion at a time. Her denial was a wall I stopped trying to climb. Numbness served me well for 14 years. It got me through college, into my treasurer role, and kept me inside the invisible fence Karen had built around my life. I was her living testament to supposed generosity, the quiet girl she'd mentored into community service. In reality, I was a satellite trapped in her orbit, my every decision dictated by her gravitational pull. The numbness held until last night. It started over something trivial, something for the community. I'd been working on a sensitive budget review, cross-checking Karen's expense reports that smelled off. I left my laptop open on the kitchen counter for 30 seconds to grab the mail. When I returned, Karen was standing there, inside my house, uninvited, scrolling through my files, her expression one of intense concentration. The sliding glass door she'd apparently let herself through was still cracked. "That's confidential, Karen," I said, voice sharper than I'd allowed in years. She didn't look up. "Everything in this neighborhood is my business. Emily, you seem to forget that. It's HOA financials. It's a breach of trust." The words from our own bylaws felt absurd coming out of my mouth in my own kitchen. She finally lifted her gaze. The air turned arctic. "Don't lecture me on policy. I am the policy." She closed the laptop with a soft, definitive click. Then she began walking toward me, and that old instinct to shrink rose up, but the spark from last night refused to die. I stood my ground. That was my mistake. Or maybe my first correct decision in 14 years. She saw the defiance. A slow, cruel smile spread across her face, the same one she used at board meetings right before she gutted someone's budget. "You're getting bold," she purred. "You think that little treasurer title gives you power. You think you're indispensable." She took another step, cornering me between the granite counter and her perfectly pressed cardigan. She smelled of lavender hand sanitizer and absolute authority. "You're just like your mother. You have nowhere else to go. You're too proud to leave, but too weak to survive without the structure I provide." And then she began to unbuckle the thin leather belt she always wore with her official khakis. The one she liked to joke was for keeping the neighborhood in line. The heavy silver buckle clicked open, unnaturally loud in the silent kitchen. The strap slid from its loops with a soft, menacing hiss. She held it looped in her hand. I watched, body frozen, mind terrifyingly clear. She said I was too proud to leave. That night, Karen Whitmore's belt hit the floor first. A deliberate theatrical thud on the Italian tile, then my back. The first strike was white-hot shock that stole the air from my lungs. It landed high across my shoulder blades, slamming me forward into the counter. My teeth clacked. She grabbed my arm, iron grip, yanked me back. The second strike landed lower, then another, and another. She didn't speak. Only the whistle of leather, the sickening slap, and my ragged breaths. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. Part of my brain detached, floating near the ceiling, cataloging every impact like data points. This wasn't a beating. This was an evidence log. When she finally stopped, my back was a raw canvas of pain. She threw the belt on the counter like a dead snake, leaned in close, breath hot against my ear. "Remember your place, dear, for the harmony of the community." Then she walked out, sliding the door shut with a soft click. I stayed leaning against the counter, listening to her heels click down the driveway until the microwave clock read 11:25 p.m. 8 minutes. It had taken her 8 minutes to shatter 14 years of numbness. The next morning pain was the first thing I registered. A living creature with claws dug deep into my muscles. I showered in lukewarm water, wincing as the spray hit my back. In the mirror, my reflection was a stranger. Pale face, dark empty eyes. But the geography of my back held my attention. A constellation of angry red welts and deep purple bruises blooming across my skin. A secret, ugly map of her rage. I chose my armor with methodical care. Soft silk camisole against the wounds, high-collared long-sleeved blouse of thick white Oxford cotton. Opaque. Professional. Nothing to see here. The drive to the HOA administrative office. Really just a converted community center with fake plants and motivational posters about harmony. Was surreal. Neighbors waved as usual, living their ordinary lives. I felt like a ghost among them. When I walked through the glass doors, the familiar chill of air conditioning felt good on my feverish skin. I nodded at the part-time receptionist, offered a tight smile, and made my way to my cubicle in the open-plan compliance wing. I sat down, booted up my computer, and the screen illuminated my face with sterile glow. I was Emily Voss, HOA treasurer. Everything was normal. Karen strolled past my desk at precisely 9:15 a.m., coffee in hand. She didn't break stride but slowed just enough, leaning toward me with that proprietary smile. "Good morning, Emily. Don't let any personal emotions affect your performance today. We have a big quarter to close. Budget review for the new fountain project." My fingers froze over the keyboard. Every instinct screamed to flinch. Instead, I slowly lifted my head and met her gaze. The fire from last night had cooled into something cold, sharp, and patient. I held her eyes, letting her see the complete absence of fear. "You should worry about your own performance, Karen," I replied, voice barely a whisper yet cutting through the office hum like ice. A flicker of surprise crossed her face, quickly masked by annoyance. She thought she had broken me. She had no idea she had created something new. She scoffed and walked away toward her corner office, the one with the panoramic view of the community pool she'd personally funded with HOA dues. As I watched her go, the last vestiges of the victim inside me died. The pain in my back was no longer just pain. It was fuel. Her words echoed, "You're too proud to leave." She was right. Leaving was running. Leaving meant she stayed on her throne untouched while I slunk away. No. I wasn't going to leave. A plan began to form in the cold, quiet clarity of my mind. It was not born of rage but of precision. It was an HOA project. The objective: not just remove myself from her toxic system, but dismantle the system itself with her at its epicenter. My role, the one she'd given me to keep me under control, was about to become my greatest weapon. I had access. I managed personnel files, yes. Even volunteers had them. Onboarding paperwork, violation notices, and confidential settlement agreements. I was the quiet, unassuming cog in the Sunnyvale machine, and I knew where all the bodies were buried. I knew the names of every resident, especially the women, who had quietly sold their houses over the last decade after personal reasons, following glowing compliance reviews. I knew how Karen fudged expense reports, channeling dues into community events that were really spa weekends for her and her cronies. My fingers moved to the mouse. I opened a new encrypted folder on an external drive hidden in my bag. I named it Project Pride. Then, with steady hand, I navigated the servers. First piece: a 3-year-old expense claim for a leadership summit in Napa. Cross-referenced with attendance logs, only Karen and one young female board intern who resigned 2 weeks later after signing an NDA. I downloaded both. The click of the mouse was quiet, but to me it was the first stone pulled from the foundation of her empire. I had begun to collect. Sunnyvale Estates presented itself as one big happy family, and it was, in the most toxic sense. On the surface, we were the epitome of suburban success. Open lawns designed to foster synergy, a fully stocked community center dispensing forced camaraderie alongside artisanal coffee from the dues-funded machine. We had Wellness Wednesdays and Flag Fridays. Motivational quotes from Karen stenciled on the walls in cheerful sans serif. Harmony is our DNA. Compliance is our North Star. It was all stage dressing. Beneath the polished concrete and ergonomic chairs, the foundation rotted with fear, hypocrisy, and secrets. And at the heart of this beautifully packaged decay was Karen Whitmore, the president to the outside world and to most inside this little kingdom. Karen was the pillar of discipline, the one who made the tough calls to keep property values high. Last year she won Neighbor of the Year, a heavy plaque that sat on her desk catching the light. I remembered the ceremony. She stood on stage radiating practiced humility, thanking her team for dedication. I sat in the audience clapping along, the phantom sting of leather still fresh against my skin. She was a master performer and Sunnyvale was her stage. My role was the quiet, unassuming crew member. As treasurer, I worked in the administrative core, the silent engine room of servers and filing cabinets. I was custodian of the community memory. Every fine, every violation, every suspiciously generous waiver, every sealed settlement passed through my hands. Every sin left a digital footprint. My cubicle was tucked away, encouraging me to be overlooked. I was efficient, quiet, reliable Emily Voss, the perfect wallpaper employee. This anonymity was a facade. Everyone knew who I was, Karen Whitmore's project. The consensus in watercooler whispers was that I was protected, a piece of HOA royalty. The irony was bitter. I wasn't protected. I was branded. My connection to Karen wasn't a shield. It was a quarantine sign. Kept people at distance. No one wanted to get too close to the president's pet project. She had the IT volunteer configured to forward her blind copies of every email I sent. She spot-checked my monitor during casual visits. She influenced every review. I once saw her rewrite a draft for a board member who politely disagreed. Her strategic vision seems unfocused. His special assessment doubled. He sold and left 6 months later. Karen was teaching lessons. She could giveth, and she could taketh away. Fueled by the cold fire from that night, my after-hours work became forensic obsession. I was no longer filing paperwork. I was an archaeologist digging through the ruins of lives she'd destroyed. I started a query. Female residents under 35 who had sold after receiving sudden violation notices from Karen over the last 5 years. The list was longer than expected. 14 names. Always the same pattern. Bright young woman buys house. Excels in community events. Karen takes special interest. Offers mentorship. High-profile committees. Exclusive dinners. Neighborhood status soars. Then sudden resignation. Vague reasons. Quiet sale. Sealed file. Another promising life erased from the directory. Night after night, long after the cleaning crew left, I sat under the dim glow of my monitor. The pain in my back had dulled to an ache. Constant reminder of purpose. I pulled contracts, glowing reviews, final violation letters. I found emails where Karen's tone shifted from encouraging to overly familiar to demanding. Emails after 10 p.m. Invitations to discuss compliance over wine. The real work was finding what she thought she'd buried. I dove into server revision logs. I discovered original drafts of violation notices full of praise, then final versions after private meetings with her, brutal critiques justifying massive fines. Click. Another brick for her tomb. This so-called family, this gleaming monument to suburban harmony, was built on silenced lives and fear. Karen wasn't just part of the rot. She was the source. Exposing her would do more than grant me freedom. It would bring the whole perfect little kingdom crashing down. But I couldn't just drop a file on a reporter's desk. It would lead back to me. They'd paint me as the disgruntled treasurer with a vendetta. I needed a catalyst, an event so public, so undeniably her own doing, that it would force an outside investigation. I needed her to light the match. I would provide the kindling. The initial spark had to come from her arrogance. Karens like her always make mistakes. Their pride is their fatal flaw. The annual Sunnyvale HOA Labor Day barbecue was the mandatory exercise in manufactured fun. This year it was at the community lakeside pavilion. Serene natural beauty serving as jarring backdrop for our unnatural dynamics. For 2 days we were forced into trust falls, awkward karaoke, and workshops on disruptive compliance. I moved through events like a ghost, polite smile fixed, presence just visible enough for the attendance sheet. I was a strategist in a war no one else knew was being fought, and this barbecue was my chosen battlefield. On the second night, the casual cookout on the private beach. Tiki torches flickered on faces drinking cheap wine from plastic cups, laughing too loudly at Karen's jokes. Karen, naturally, was center of it all, enthroned in a low beach chair, glass of expensive Chardonnay in hand. She was 3 drinks past charming, deep into belligerent arrogance. "You see all this?" she slurred. Grand sweeping gesture encompassing the lake, the pavilion, the star-filled sky. "This is all possible because of me. Because I make the hard decisions no one else has the stomach for." A few board members nodded vigorously, perfect blend of admiration and fear. Every single person eating these sad little hot dogs owes their property value to me. Their mortgages, their kids' private schools, that's all on my tab. They owe me. This was it. The arrogance loosened by alcohol turning into confession. Under cover of the communal table I unlocked my phone. Thumb found voice memo, Pressed record. I leaned forward, injecting playful skepticism. That's a big claim, Karen. You sound pretty confident. Proof of all this loyalty you've bought. She turned her heavy-lidded gaze on me. For a second, the cold fury from the kitchen flashed. Then smug drunken smirk. She loved an audience. Proof? Honey, I have binders full of proof. I own these people. She fumbled for her phone, swiped to photo gallery. The board members leaned in. See, she said, turning the screen. This is what discipline looks like. My blood ran cold. Not spreadsheets. Pictures. Photos of female residents, my neighbors. Candid shots in yards. At meetings. Framed to linger on necklines or laughter. Trophies. Then I saw it. A photo of Sarah from 2 houses down, standing at the community whiteboard during last budget meeting. Professional pose, but taken from behind at a low angle that was undeniably leering. In the reflection of the whiteboard clear as day, the Sunnyvale HOA logo. Karen had just handed me the key. I pulled back, shaking my head with another fake laugh. Okay, I get it. You're the queen. I stood up. I'm calling it a night. She barely registered my departure, too busy basking in her phone and nervous admiration. Back in the sterile quiet of my townhouse, adrenaline hit like a physical blow. My hands shook, but my mind was diamond hard. The time for passive collection was over. It was time to set the trap. I powered on my burner laptop, connected through 3 VPNs to the public pavilion Wi-Fi. I created a new anonymous email, Sunnyvale Whistleblower 7 at Proton.me. The message was brutally simple. I found the contact for Julia Rossi, investigative journalist at the Bay Area Suburban Chronicle, known for deep dives into local corruption. Subject: Tip, Sunnyvale HOA President. Your HOA President Karen Whitmore keeps trophies of her neighborhood harassment. She calls it proof of loyalty. I attached a 30-second audio clip of her drunken monologue. Every single person owes me. I own these people. Just enough to be inflammatory. Undeniably her voice. I hit send. The waiting was hardest. I stared at the screen. Then, at the 10-minute mark, a reply. Voice confirmed. Can you prove the rest is real? Need more than audio. I typed back. Wait until Monday. Phase 1 complete. Now Phase 2, the move that would incinerate my name from any suspect list. At 2:30 a.m., when the resort pavilion was deep in drunken slumber, I slipped out and made my way to the business center. During the chaos of the barbecue, while she was showing off her gallery, I had airdropped 3 of the most damning photos, including Sarah's, to my phone. Weeks ago, I'd used my treasurer admin privileges to view the security questions on Karen's official HOA email account. I had everything I needed. I logged into her account. The interface was familiar, but seeing it through her eyes felt like a profound violation. I composed a new email to Julia Rossi from Karen's address. Here's the proof you need. Attached the full 10-minute audio and the raw image files. I hit send. It now looked like Karen, in drunken stupidity or panic, had accidentally sent the evidence herself. Or that someone with access, a rival, a lover, had leaked it. Anyone but me. I logged out, cleared history, returned to my room. The final piece was my own public story, the story of a victim, not the orchestrator. I opened my personal laptop and began to write. I wrote about the bruises, the fear, the suffocating culture of silence. I wrote about her words, "You're too proud to leave." I attached the anonymously cropped photo of the welts on my back I'd taken the morning after. I logged into the neighborhood Facebook group and Nextdoor under my name. I uploaded the text and image, then clicked schedule post. Time? 8:05 a.m. Monday. The company, HOA, wide mandatory Q3 compliance meeting was scheduled for 8 a.m. Monday. Karen was the keynote speaker. She would be standing on stage in front of the entire neighborhood talking about integrity at the exact moment the world discovered she had none. The trap was set. All I had to do was watch. Monday morning arrived cloaked in cold, sterile fog that seemed to seep through the community center's glass walls. The main auditorium was packed, sea of khakis and nervous energy. It was 7:55 a.m. The air thick with burnt coffee and low, anxious murmur of a neighborhood waiting to be lectured. On the giant screen above the stage, the Sunnyvale HOA logo pulsed with soft, hypnotic blue light overlaid with the title, "Integrity as our cornerstone, our ethical framework for Q3." It was a masterpiece of suburban satire, and the author didn't even know it. I found a seat in the last row. Strategic anonymity. The tiered seating gave me perfect view of the stage and hundreds of residents. My heart was frantic, but my hands were perfectly steady as I placed my laptop on the fold-out table. Precisely 8 a.m. The lights dimmed. A single harsh spotlight illuminated the podium. Karen Whitmore walked onto the stage to polite, obligatory applause. She was immaculate. Charcoal blazer perfectly tailored, silver hair styled, smile a weapon of calibrated warmth. She looked powerful, untouchable, a paragon of neighborhood leadership. She adjusted the microphone. Her rich, confident voice filled the room. "Good morning, family," she began, letting the word hang. "Thank you for being here. We're not just going to talk numbers or budgets. We're going to talk about our soul, our character. We're going to talk about the ethics that define us as a Sunnyvale team." I opened my laptop. 2 browser tabs. My Facebook and Nextdoor feeds. The scheduled posts loaded. Digital bombs waiting for detonation. The text ready. The cropped image of my bruised back a dark, ugly blot against clean white. On stage, Karen warmed to her subject, pacing with commanding yet maternal gestures. "Because trust is our most valuable asset," she declared, voice resonating with false sincerity. "It's the currency of our neighborhood. Every action, every decision must be beyond reproach. Transparent. Ethical." My fingers hovered over the trackpad. The clock ticked to 8:03. "Here at Sunnyvale we hold each other to a higher standard," she said, voice rising with theatrical passion. "We protect our own. We ensure a safe, respectful environment for every single member of our 312 homes." The numbers on the giant screen clicked over. It happened in an instant, silent digital shift that changed everything. At that exact second, my phone, face down on the table, gave a single sharp vibration. My post was live. On Facebook and Nextdoor, under my name Emily Voss, a new post appeared. Title stark, "Inside Sunnyvale Estates, What Integrity Really Means." It began with a simple, brutal line, "This is what our president's higher standard looks like." Below it, the photo of my back, followed by my story and a link to the just published article by Julia Rossi at the Bay Area Suburban Chronicle containing the full audio of her drunken boasting and high-resolution images of her trophies. The trap had sprung. For a few seconds, nothing happened. Karen continued speaking, oblivious. Then the sound started, small. A single isolated buzz from the front row as a board member's phone vibrated with a news alert. Then another. Then a cascade. A low spreading wave of electronic vibrations rippled through the auditorium, the collective hum of hundreds of phones receiving the same notification at once. The sound of a secret being told to everyone simultaneously. Heads began to drop. The sea of faces once upturned toward the stage, now a field of bowed heads illuminated by ghostly blue-white light of screens. A murmur started, low shocked whisper that grew. Row by row I saw eyes widen, hands cover mouths. A woman in the third row nudged her neighbor, face pale, showing him her screen. The carefully constructed atmosphere of community reverence shattered. The room was no longer hers. Karen faltered. She had been in the middle of a sentence about forward-thinking leadership, but her voice trailed off. She could feel the palpable shift, the massive silent withdrawal of attention and respect. She squinted against the stage lights. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, voice tight with irritation. "If I could have your attention." No one looked up. The whispers grew louder. She was losing them. She was losing control. "I said I need your attention," she repeated, voice sharper, edged with threat of authority. She saw only tops of heads, glow of phones. Panic crept into her expression. "Put your phones away now." Her command, which would have been met with instant obedience 2 minutes earlier, was met with silence. She scanned the room, eyes wide and searching, a desperate, confused queen whose subjects were suddenly ignoring her decrees. Her gaze swept across rows until finally it landed on me in the last row. I had been waiting for this moment. I wasn't looking at my laptop anymore. I was looking directly at her. My face calm, expression unreadable in the vast charged space. Our eyes locked. She saw me. She saw the stillness in my posture, the utter lack of fear. And in that silent, electric moment, I gave her my confession. I didn't shout. I didn't stand. I simply mouthed the words slowly, deliberately, ensuring she could read them clearly across the room. "You said I was too proud to leave." Comprehension dawned on her face like watching a building collapse in slow motion. The confusion, anger, panic dissolved, replaced by pure sickening horror. She connected the vibrations, the glowing screens, the whispers, and the calm, steady gaze of the treasurer she thought she had broken. She understood it was me. It had all been me. And it was too late. The spell was broken. A junior board member in the middle section, a young woman I barely knew, stood up. She didn't say a word. She just turned and walked up the aisle toward the exit. A few seconds later, 2 women from the landscaping committee followed, then a small group from the social committee. The exodus was silent, orderly, and absolutely devastating. It wasn't a riot. It was a quiet collective judgment. They walked out not in anger but in disgust, abandoning a leader exposed as a fraud. Karen stood frozen on the stage, mouth slightly agape. She watched them leave, face ashen under the spotlight. The applause that had welcomed her was now replaced by the soft shuffling sound of hundreds of footsteps walking away. I stayed in my seat until nearly half the room had emptied. I watched her shrink, the powerful president becoming just a small pathetic woman alone on a stage bathed in the glow of a presentation slide that now read respect. Finally, I closed my laptop, slid it into my bag, and stood up. I gave her one last long look, letting her see the finality in my eyes. Then I turned my back on her and joined the silent procession, leaving the auditorium. The hum of the projector and the ghost of her career were the only things left behind. The hours after I walked out were a blur of controlled chaos, a digital hurricane making landfall. By the time I reached the quiet sanctuary of my townhouse, my name and story were everywhere. The internet moves at the speed of light. My Nextdoor and Facebook posts were the nexus from which 1,000 other stories exploded. Julia Rossi's article with its damning audio and photographic evidence was the primary payload cited and linked in a rapidly growing ecosystem of outrage. News alerts flashed. Scandal at Sunnyvale HOA. President accused of abuse. Harassment. Leaked files reveal trophy photos of residents. The storm I had seeded was now a Category 5, tearing the roof off Karen's house of cards. Back at the community center, the atmosphere had devolved from stunned silence to open panic. I watched through a flurry of texts and screenshots from the few neighbors I trusted. The massive digital marquee in the lobby, which usually displayed proud property values, was a bleeding river of red. Average home price down 12.4%. Each percentage point was a small taste of victory, a tangible measure of the damage I had inflicted. It was the only language Karens like her truly understood. At 10:15 a.m., an email from the HOA board chair landed in every resident's inbox. It was a masterclass in damage control. We are deeply disturbed and concerned by the allegations. The behavior described is abhorrent. We are launching an immediate comprehensive investigation. It was a desperate attempt to build a firewall between Karen and the association, to amputate the diseased limb before the gangrene spread. But I knew the infection was in the bloodstream. My summons came at 11:30 a.m. A cold, sterile calendar invite from the head of the compliance committee and the association's general counsel. Subject: urgent meeting. The walk back to the center was surreal. I felt like a foreign agent entering hostile territory I myself had destabilized. The looks from neighbors were a cocktail of fear, awe, and raw curiosity. I was no longer Emily Voss, the quiet treasurer. I was the lightning rod. The boardroom was cold. The head of compliance, a woman who once praised my meticulous spreadsheets, wouldn't meet my eyes. The general counsel, a man with a face like a clenched fist, got straight to the point. Emily, your social media post this morning. Its timing was remarkable. I met his gaze and held it. I had rehearsed this moment 1,000 times. I was the victim. My story was the truth. It was my only shield and my sharpest weapon. My timing was my own, I said, voice steady. It took me a long time to build up the courage to speak. And the article in the Chronicle containing confidential files, you know anything about that? He pressed, eyes narrowing. I know what I read this morning just like everyone else, I replied, the lie smooth and practiced. I don't know where the reporter got her information. I only shared my own story, the story of what she did to me in my own home. Are you saying I don't have a right to do that? He had no answer. By focusing on the unimpeachable truth of my own abuse, I made their other questions seem accusatory and cruel. I had built a fortress around myself made of my own pain. They couldn't touch me. The meeting was cut short by a sharp knock. The counsel's assistant poked her head in, face pale. The police are here. The arrival of the local PD shifted the crisis from PR nightmare to criminal investigation. 2 uniformed officers and 3 plainclothes detectives walked into the lobby, and the remaining hum of gossip died instantly. They had a warrant for the servers, for Karen's computers, for all her files. The moment they were escorted toward the IT room was the moment the HOA officially lost control of the narrative. This was my evidence log, and it was now being entered into the official record. While the association reeled, something else was happening on Nextdoor. The hashtag I'd ended my post with, too proud to leave, had taken on a life of its own. It was trending locally, then regionally. It had detached from my specific story and become a rallying cry. Residents, women and men, were using it to share their own experiences of being trapped in toxic HOAs. A software engineer from the next subdivision wrote about a president who stole her landscaping plans. A marketing executive detailed years of subtle verbal abuse. Each story was a fresh indictment of a system that protects the powerful. My personal act of revenge had inadvertently sparked a movement. Watching the hashtag climb, I felt a dizzying mix of empowerment and crushing responsibility. That evening, Julia Rossi arranged an interview for me with a national news network. I agreed on condition of absolute anonymity. I sat in a darkened studio, face completely obscured by shadow, voice electronically modulated into a low, unrecognizable tone. The interviewer's questions were gentle, but I knew millions were watching. I told the story of the belt, of the quiet terror that had ruled my life. I was calm, factual, unwavering. The phrase you used, too proud to leave, has become an anthem for many, the interviewer said. What does it mean to you? It was meant to be a cage, I said, disguised voice filling the studio. A way to tell me I was trapped by my own ambition, that I needed her to survive. But she was wrong. Our pride isn't what keeps us trapped. It's what gives us the strength to fight back. It's not the pride to stay. It's the pride to make them leave. The next day, the inevitable happened. Another association-wide email. Effective immediately, Karen Whitmore has been placed on indefinite administrative leave, pending the results of the internal and external investigations. suspended. It was a victory, but a hollow one. It was a calculated move to appease homeowners, not a declaration of justice. I knew Karen. She was a cornered animal now, stripped of her title but still possessing immense personal wealth and bottomless capacity for cruelty. She wouldn't slink away in disgrace. She would lash out. The first blow had to be followed by a second, a final irrefutable strike she could never recover from. I needed to find the one piece of evidence that would guarantee her complete annihilation. The battle was won, but the war for my survival had just begun. The quiet that followed the initial storm was more unnerving than the chaos itself. For 1 week there was a fragile, tense silence. The media frenzy subsided into a low, simmering hum of speculative articles. The HOA was in lockdown, bleeding property values and reputation, its board members trapped in endless damage control meetings. I had been placed on paid administrative leave, a move designed to get me out of the office and, they hoped, out of sight. I spent the days in my small townhouse, curtains drawn, feeling less like a victor and more like a soldier in a trench listening for incoming artillery. I knew it was coming. Karen would not accept defeat. It arrived on a Tuesday, not with a bang but with the quiet efficiency of a process server. A thick cream-colored envelope was hand-delivered to my door bearing the embossed logo of a notoriously aggressive Bay Area law firm. The contents were a declaration of war written in the cold, brutal language of legal threats. It was a cease and desist letter followed by a preliminary notice of intent to sue for defamation, libel, and tortious interference to the sum of $50 million. The letter accused me of orchestrating a malicious and fabricated campaign to destroy Karen's impeccable personal and professional reputation. Impeccable. I had to laugh at that. The words were designed to terrify, to crush me under the weight of potential financial ruin, to bully me into retracting my story and disappearing forever. I laid the pages out on my coffee table. A younger version of myself would have been paralyzed. But I was no longer that person. She had beaten her out of me in a pristine kitchen on a quiet suburban night. I felt a surge of something cold and pure, an anger so profound it felt like clarity. The letter was confirmation of her character when cornered. She would not use truth as her shield but lies and money as her sword. It was a predictable, pathetic move. She had her lawyers, her millions, her network of powerful people who would close ranks. I had the one thing that could defeat all of it, the truth, and one more piece she didn't know I possessed. The recording I'd made at the barbecue was over 10 minutes long. The clip I'd leaked was damning, but the part one had saved was my masterstroke. It was from later in her drunken tirade, after a few people had left, when her talk had turned more personal. She had been complaining about my attitude at work and had said my name. I sat at my laptop, pulled up the audio file, and isolated the perfect 20-second clip. Her voice, thick with Chardonnay and arrogance, was chillingly clear. Emily, for example, she gets defiant, thinks she's untouchable. But you have to remind them of the proper order of things. She deserves some discipline, a firm hand. That's all it was. Discipline. Discipline. The same word my mother had used for years to excuse her cruelty. The word she now used to reframe her violence. I sent the new audio file to Julia Rossi. My email contained only one sentence. She thinks this is what discipline sounds like. The counterattack launched less than 12 hours later. The Bay Area Suburban Chronicle published a follow-up story that hit the internet like a second shockwave. The headline was brutal simplicity. Discipline or abuse? New leaked audio. Sunnyvale HOA president calls beating of treasurer a firm hand. The inclusion of the single word treasurer changed the entire narrative. My anonymous television interview had hinted at a personal connection. But this was the first time the professional and personal relationship had been explicitly confirmed in mainstream press. The story was no longer just about a corrupt president and a wronged employee. It was now a dark domestic horror story, a tale of neighborhood abuse masquerading as community leadership. The public's reaction was immediate and visceral. The anger doubled, tripled. It became primal. Comment sections and social media feeds erupted with a new level of fury. Abusing an employee was a crime. Abusing the very treasurer who managed the money you stole, while living in the same community, was a violation that ignited far more personal rage. Karen had tried to use the law to silence me, and in response I had used her own words to put her on trial in the court of public opinion, recasting her as a monster in her own kingdom. The phone call I had been dreading came that afternoon. My mother's name flashed on the screen. For a moment I considered not answering, but I knew I had to. I owed her a final goodbye to the fantasy she insisted on living in. I took a breath and accepted the call. Emily. Her voice was a ragged, sobbing mess. What have you done? The things they're saying. They're calling her a monster. You're on every news channel. You're destroying this community. I listened to her torrent of panicked, tearful accusations and felt nothing but profound, weary sadness. She wasn't defending Karen. She was defending the fragile structure of her own life, the life Karen had bought her with perfect lawns and zero special assessments. She was mourning the loss of her comfortable cage. There is no community, Mom, I said, voice quiet but firm. There is just you, me, and the woman who beats us. She destroyed that community the first time she decided control was more important than decency. She did it a long time ago. You just didn't want to see it. A choked, strangled sound came from her end. Then the line went dead. I knew it was the last time we would speak for a very long time. Maybe forever. I had amputated the final tie to my old life. I was completely on my own. And for the first time I felt truly free. A few days later an email appeared from Evelyn Reed, a prominent national activist and lawyer who had spent her career fighting for homeowners' rights against abusive HOAs. She had been following my story and the Too Proud to Leave movement. She wrote that my actions had created a watershed moment and that she wanted to help me channel it into something permanent. She proposed creating a foundation, a nonprofit that would provide legal aid and financial support to residents who found themselves in the same position I had been in. Too proud to leave, but without the resources to fight back. We met for coffee in a small discreet cafe downtown. She was older, with sharp, intelligent eyes that missed nothing. She laid out a plan to incorporate, to fundraise, to build a network of pro bono lawyers. This is your legacy, Emily. If you want it, she said. I want to do it, I said without hesitation. But I have one condition, the name. She raised an eyebrow. I want to call it the Pride to Leave Foundation, I said. I want to take the words she used to shame me and turn them into a weapon for everyone. A slow smile spread across Evelyn's face. Perfect, she said. Absolutely perfect. The following week I sat in a lawyer's office, the air smelling of old paper and quiet justice. Evelyn sat beside me as I signed the documents that officially incorporated the foundation. I was listed as the founder, but my name was shielded behind the anonymity of the corporate structure. I then signed another paper, a wire transfer authorization. I drained my savings account, every penny I had carefully put away, and made it the foundation's first anonymous donation. I walked out of the lawyer's office and into the bright, cold California afternoon. The lawsuit from Karen's lawyers was still a threat, a dark cloud on the horizon. My relationship with my mother was a fresh open wound. But as I walked through the city, I didn't feel scared or alone. The public storm was raging, but I had found a quiet center. I had played my hand. The police and the district attorney had the evidence. The public knew the truth. And now something new was being built from the wreckage. Something that would outlast her career and my pain. The war shifted from the chaotic public battlefield of the media to the quiet, methodical grinding of the legal system. The district attorney's office, armed with the contents of the Sunnyvale servers, was a behemoth awakened. The investigation, as I followed it through Julia Rossi's diligent reporting, was a masterclass in forensic accounting. It was no longer just about the salacious details of harassment. It was about the cold, hard, indisputable language of numbers. Detectives from the white-collar crime division began to meticulously unravel Karen's financial empire within the HOA. They focused on her discretionary budgets, specifically a multi-million-dollar fund allocated for community enhancement. On the surface, perfectly legitimate. But as they cross-referenced expenditures with travel records and receipts, a pattern of blatant fraud emerged. Dozens of trips to luxury resorts in Napa and Lake Tahoe expensed as leadership offsites. The attendees were always the same: Karen and a single junior female board member. The seminars never happened. The receipts showed spa treatments, $1,000 dinners, and charges from high-end jewelry stores. She wasn't just a bully. She was a thief, using community money to finance her seductions and buy silence. Each fraudulent expense report was another nail in her coffin. A crime far cleaner and easier to prosecute than the murky complexities of neighborhood harassment. The news of the financial investigation was the signal flare other victims had been waiting for. The wall of NDAs began to crack. Empowered by the knowledge that this was now a criminal case, women began to come forward. Their lawyers contacted the DA's office offering testimony in exchange for immunity. Sarah from 2 houses down provided the DA with her original glowing compliance review that directly contradicted the fraudulent one Karen had placed in her file. Another woman, a former social committee chair, came forward with a story of a business trip to a vineyard that had ended with her selling her house a week later. Each new voice corroborated the pattern. I was no longer a lone accuser. I was the first domino in a long falling line. My summons from the DA's office came in a crisp formal letter. I was to appear before a grand jury. I met with the lawyer Evelyn had provided, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Alana. We sat in her quiet book-lined office and she laid out the strategy. You are the public face of this, Emily. But in that room you are not the architect of her downfall. You are a victim of assault. Nothing more. But I am the architect, I countered. The words felt strange and true. She conceded with a flicker of a smile. But the grand jury doesn't need to know that. Karen's lawyers are going to try to paint you as a vengeful, manipulative liar who concocted this whole scheme. We are not going to give them a single thread to pull on. You will testify only to what you posted publicly, the events of that night. You will describe the assault. You will be factual, emotional, but controlled. Let the financial evidence speak for the corporate crimes. Let the other women speak for the harassment. Your job is to be the unimpeachable victim. Your role was the spark. Don't let them convince the world you were the arsonist. It was sound strategic advice, but it felt deeply unsatisfying. I had orchestrated a suburban coup, a masterpiece of revenge, and now I had to pretend to be a simple passive victim. I had to hide my own strength, my own cold, calculating fury. But I knew she was right. I followed her instructions to the letter. In the sterile, intimidating grand jury room, I told the truth, but not the whole truth. I spoke only of the belt, of her words, of the bruises. My testimony was a narrow, focused beam of light on a single brutal act. I was calm. I was credible. And I was, for all intents and purposes, a supporting character in the larger drama I had created. I walked out of the courthouse feeling strangely empty, like an actor who had just delivered a convincing but hollow performance. I had done my part. I was now a spectator. Then one evening something happened I never could have predicted. I was watching the local evening news when a shaky long-lens video filled the screen. It was the exterior of the downtown police precinct. And walking slowly, hesitantly up the stone steps was a woman I recognized instantly. It was my mother. She looked smaller than I'd ever seen her, shoulders hunched, clutching her purse like a shield. The reporter's voiceover mentioned an unidentified woman had arrived to give a statement in the Karen Whitmore case. But I knew. My heart lodged itself in my throat. The confirmation came the next morning. An unnamed source within the SFPD had leaked the details to Julia Rossi. My mother had given a full sworn statement. She had not only corroborated my account of the assault, but had detailed her own history as a victim of Karen's abuse, verbal cruelty, and physical intimidation stretching back over a decade. She had never been hit with the belt, but she had been backed into corners, spirit broken with 1,000 small acts of violence. It was a stunning, shocking act of courage from a woman I had long dismissed as a coward. And I understood with sudden painful clarity that she wasn't doing it for me. She was doing it for herself. It was the last desperate act of a woman trying to reclaim her own life from the woman who had stolen it. Her statement, however, had an unintended consequence. In confirming my story of domestic abuse, she had inadvertently confirmed my identity to the world. The narrative puzzle was now complete. That night, the national news anchor looked gravely into the camera. Sources close to the investigation have now confirmed the anonymous employee behind the viral "Too Proud to Leave" post is indeed Karen Whitmore's own treasurer, a 29-year-old HOA volunteer named Emily Voss. My name. They said my name. My anonymity, the final shield, was gone. The grand jury indictment came down on a Thursday. Karen was charged with felony assault, grand larceny, and multiple counts of wire fraud. The system, once it finally turned its gears, moved with surprising brutal efficiency. Her arrest was quiet, almost anticlimactic. Two detectives met her on the steps of her lawyer's office. No chase. No dramatic raid, just a quiet conversation, the glint of handcuffs, and the discreet click of a car door closing. The queen was taken from the board not with triumphant checkmate but with quiet procedural removal. The HOA, which had hidden behind indefinite leave, acted within the hour. Termination was immediate. A press conference was held that afternoon. The new board chair stood at a podium, face a carefully constructed mask of somber regret. We are an association built on trust and integrity. The actions Ms. Whitmore is accused of are a betrayal of everything we stand for. We unequivocally condemn all forms of violence and abuse both in the neighborhood and in the home. He spoke of new initiatives, mandatory sensitivity training, renewed commitment to a safe and equitable community. He was performing a corporate exorcism, casting out the demon of Karen to save the soul of the HOA. It was a flawless performance. I watched it on live stream feeling nothing but distant clinical disgust. My phone began to buzz incessantly. Flood of texts and emails from neighbors. All variations on the same theme. Emily, we're so proud of you. You're so brave. Thinking of you. We support you. The words felt like ashes. They were offering support to the person they thought I was, a simple victim who had bravely spoken out. They didn't see the cold, calculating strategist who had burned an entire empire to the ground to settle a score. Their sympathy was for a ghost. I typed the same short reply to each. Don't support. Just remember, a year is a long time. Long enough for a wound to become a scar. Long enough for a news cycle to move on. For a neighborhood scandal to become a business school case study. And for the slow, inexorable gears of justice to finally grind to their conclusion. 1 year to the day after I hit schedule post, the full investigation documents were unsealed and made public. The final indictment was a cold, brutal piece of literature. Karen Whitmore was formally charged on 5 separate counts. Felony assault stemming from my mother's and my own testimony, 2 counts of wire fraud related to her use of the community enhancement budget, 1 count of grand larceny for embezzlement of dues, and 1 count of computer fraud for illegally accessing and altering resident records. The $50 million defamation suit against me was unceremoniously dropped. You can't sue for damage to a reputation that has been legally and factually proven to be a fiction. The public reckoning was complete. Karen Whitmore was no longer a disgraced president. She was a common criminal awaiting trial. A woman whose name was now a permanent synonym for suburban rot and neighborhood abuse. The HOA, after a massive special assessment buyback and the public ousting of a dozen senior board members, was slowly, painfully rebranding itself. The name remained, but it was forever tarnished. My own life had transformed in ways I could never have imagined. My face and name were public now, inextricably linked to the scandal. For a time I was a reluctant celebrity, hounded by tabloids and offered lucrative book deals, all of which I refused. My story was not for sale. But as the initial frenzy died down, I was left with a new strange kind of identity. I was no longer a victim or a ghost. I was a symbol. It was this new status that led to the invitation. It came in a heavy cream-colored envelope, the kind her lawyers had used. But this one held no threats. It was an invitation to be the keynote speaker at the annual National Homeowners Rights Conference, one of the most prestigious events in the country. My first instinct was to decline. I had done what I needed to do. I had no desire to be a professional survivor telling my war story on an endless loop. But Evelyn Reed, whose Pride to Leave Foundation was now a national force, convinced me otherwise. This isn't for you, Emily. It's for them. You have to show them what comes after. And so I found myself standing in the wings of a massive stage in a Chicago convention center looking out at a sea of 3,000 faces. The air buzzed with anticipation. They had all read the articles, seen the news clips. They knew my story, but they hadn't heard from me. Not really. Not since that brief defiant statement on my doorstep. The introduction was glowing, filled with words like courage, resilience, and a voice for the voiceless. I felt a strange sense of detachment, as if they were talking about someone else. Then they said my name and a wave of applause washed over me. I took a deep breath and walked out into the bright hot lights. The podium stood in the center, but I walked right past it and stood at the very edge of the stage, closing the distance between me and the audience. I had no notes. I had no script. I had only the truth. The applause died down and a profound, expectant silence fell. I looked out at the thousands of pairs of eyes and saw my own story reflected back. I saw the young homeowners, the mid-level board volunteers, the senior presidents. I saw the weariness, the ambition, the frustration, and the hope. I let the silence stretch. A little over a year ago, I began, voice clear and steady, amplified throughout the vast hall. A woman told me that I was too proud to leave. A murmur went through the crowd. They knew the line. She said it as an insult. She meant that my ambition, my desire to keep the home I had worked so hard to build, was a chain. She believed she owned me because I wasn't willing to walk away from the life I had built. She thought my pride was my prison. I paused, letting the words sink in. She wasn't entirely wrong. I was proud. I am proud. But she fundamentally misunderstood the nature of that pride. She thought it was about status, about a perfect lawn, about never getting a violation notice. She didn't understand that true pride isn't about what you are willing to endure to keep something. It's about what you are no longer willing to tolerate in order to be yourself. Heads nodded in the audience. A ripple of recognition. She created a system built on fear and silence. She believed that system was unbreakable. She believed she was untouchable. So I decided not to leave her system. I decided to break it instead. A smattering of applause broke out, but I held up a hand and it subsided. They called me too proud to leave, I said, voice dropping slightly, becoming harder, colder. So I made them beg me to stay. The words landed with the force of a physical blow. For a split-second absolute stillness, then the room erupted. It started in the front row and spread like wildfire. A roar of applause, of cheers, of raw cathartic release. The entire auditorium rose to its feet. It wasn't just applause. It was a declaration, a standing ovation that went on and on. A wave of sound that washed over me not as validation but as affirmation. I had spoken their secret language, articulated the silent rage they had all felt at one time or another. During the Q&A that followed, the questions were about policy, about legal recourse, about the work of the foundation, which Evelyn had informed me that morning had just crossed the $12 million mark in donations. I answered them calmly, speaking about my new work. I had, ironically, stayed in Homeowners Association consulting, but I no longer worked for a massive soulless bureaucracy. I now consulted for smaller growth stage communities, helping them build their HOA departments from the ground up. I wrote policies that had real teeth. I created anonymous reporting systems managed by third parties. I vetted their leadership teams, searching for the telltale signs of the rot I knew so well. I was no longer a gatekeeper of the old system. I was the architect of a new one. Then a young woman near the front stood up, voice trembling slightly as she held the microphone. My question is personal. After everything she did, if Karen Whitmore ever apologized to you, could you forgive her? The question hung in the air. The room grew quiet again. All eyes on me. They were asking about grace, about closure, about the final traditional step in a victim's journey. I thought about her not as a monster but as the small pathetic woman I had last seen on that stage. I thought about the concept of her apology, an act that would be designed to grant her peace, not me. An apology is about the speaker, I said, voice soft but clear. It's their attempt to unburden themselves. Forgiveness is a transaction that is often demanded of the person who was harmed. I'm no longer interested in that economy. I looked directly at the young woman. She can speak, but I am the one who gets to be heard. A final thunderous wave of applause broke out, a sound that felt deeper and more resonant than before. It was the sound of understanding. It was the sound of a new set of rules being written. As the applause washed over me, a genuine unforced smile touched my lips for the first time in over a year. I had done it. I had taken her power, her association, and her name. And in that moment, standing in the light, hearing that sound, I knew with absolute certainty that I had finally truly taken my own life back. The circle was closed. I never thought I would go back. For a year, the Sunnyvale Estates Community Center was just a shape on the horizon, a glass and stucco ghost I would occasionally glimpse from my new apartment window. It belonged to a different life, a different person. But there was one last piece of business, a final quiet ritual I needed to perform. So on a crisp, clear autumn afternoon, I found myself walking down the familiar stretch of the main boulevard, the building looming larger with every step. The lobby had been sterilized. The cheerful, hypocritical blue of the old Sunnyvale HOA logo had been replaced with a muted professional gray. The massive stenciled quotes about integrity and harmony were gone. The walls now covered in bland, inoffensive abstract art. It was a space scrubbed clean of its history, desperate to forget. The new receptionist, a young woman with a bright professional smile, looked at me without a hint of recognition as I approached the security gate. I didn't need a visitor's pass. My old keycard, which I had never returned, still worked. The gate beeped and flashed green. A final small act of insubordination. The elevator ride was a silent ascent through my own past. I got out on the executive level. The thick carpet muffled my footsteps. The air was still, carrying the same faint scent of industrial cleaner and ambition. But the energy was different. The palpable tension that had always radiated from the corner office was gone, replaced by a quiet, almost feral diligence. People kept their heads down. No one made eye contact. They were survivors of a community cataclysm, treading carefully on new, unsteady ground. I walked down the long hallway. My destination at the end, her office. The polished brass nameplate beside the heavy oak door was gone, leaving behind a faint, ghostly outline. The door was slightly ajar. I pushed it open and stepped inside. The room had been stripped bare. The massive, imposing mahogany desk where she had signed off on fines and budgets with equal indifference was gone. The leather chairs where nervous residents had sat waiting for judgment were gone. The wall of photos, a gallery of her power, her shaking hands with the mayor, her on a yacht with other presidents, her with my mother, her smile a beautiful tragic lie, was now just a blank white expanse. All that remained was the view. A floor-to-ceiling window took up the entire back wall, offering a breathtaking panoramic vista of the community and the lake beyond. The community pool stood proud and blue in the distance. Tiny figures moved silently across the lawns and the neighborhood sprawled below, a complex living organism. This was what her power had bought her. The ability to look down on the world, to see it all as a map under her control. I stood there for a long time looking out at the view she had cherished, and I felt nothing. It was just a window. It was just a neighborhood. She had drawn her power not from the view but from what she did while she was looking at it. The room was not haunted. It was just empty. I took out my phone. It felt heavy and potent in my hand. A small black slab of glass and silicon that had proven more powerful than a 300-home kingdom. I unlocked it. My social media apps were on the second page now, no longer the tools of my daily life. I opened the one I had used to launch the first missile. My profile picture was a simple professional headshot, the one I used for my consulting work, pinned to the top of my feed. A permanent fixture was the post from a year ago. Inside Sunnyvale Estates, what integrity really means. The metrics were frozen in time, a digital monument. 5.4 million likes. 3.2 million shares, 1.7 million comments. I scrolled through a few. A cascade of human emotion frozen in text. Messages of outrage, support, gratitude. Thousands of other stories. Many confessions of similar abuses. A vast crowdsourced library of neighborhood pain. All of it tethered to my one act of defiance. My eyes found the original text. My words. And the grainy cropped photo of my own skin, a secret map of her violence made public, and then at the very top, the quote I had used as my title, her own words, forever enshrined as the epitaph of her career. She's too proud to leave. The line sat there, a relic from a past I no longer inhabited. It was the thesis of a story that was now over. But it was the wrong thesis. It framed me as the one who had to make a choice to stay or to go. It was her narrative and I had used it to destroy her. But it was time to write my own. My fingers moved to the small edit icon. The text box appeared, the cursor blinking patiently. I deleted the quote. Then I wrote a new one, a simple declarative sentence. So I made her leave first. The cursor blinked at the end of the line. It was a subtle change. Almost insignificant in the grand scheme of things. But to me it was everything. It was the difference between escaping and evicting. It was the difference between running from a fire and picking up the hose to put it out. It was the difference between being a victim and being a victor. I looked at the new sentence, my sentence, and I pressed update. The app refreshed. The post was the same, but the title was new. My truth. My final word on the matter. I locked the phone and its screen went black, turning into a dark mirror. I saw my own reflection in it, framed against the panoramic view of the neighborhood. It was my face, my eyes, but the fear that had been their constant inhabitant for 14 years was gone. The constant weary tension around my mouth had relaxed. There were no tears. There was no rage. There was only a profound, unshakable, liberating calm. I slipped the phone back into my pocket. I didn't give the empty office or the spectacular view a second glance. Their power over me was broken. I turned and walked out, closing the heavy oak door behind me with a soft final click. I walked back down the long hallway through the quiet humming office. I walked into the elevator and descended, watching the neighborhood rise up to meet me. I walked through the sanitized lobby, past the new receptionist who was still oblivious, and pushed open the heavy glass doors. The afternoon sun hit me with an almost physical force, bright and warm and real. I paused on the sidewalk, letting the light wash over me, blinking as my eyes adjusted. The noise of the neighborhood, the distant laughter from the pool, the murmur of the crowd, was the sound of life. And it had never sounded so sweet. As I turned to walk away, my eye caught a reflection in the building's polished glass facade. It was my own reflection, a silhouette against the sun. And for a fleeting second, it was superimposed over new lettering etched on the glass of the ground floor retail space. A new tenant whose name I hadn't noticed on my way in. The letters spelled out, "Pride to Leave Foundation." I smiled, a real genuine smile, and then I walked away, disappearing into the neighborhood, the sun warm on my back. Thank you for listening to my story. I'd love to know where you're listening from. So please drop a comment below and let's connect and share our thoughts. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and if this story resonated with you, please consider hitting the hype button to help it be heard by more people. Word count, 1,000.